Entire family enabled my brother's stalking behavior for years until he broke into my girlfriend's school at night. I exposed everything in court and now they're all facing jail time. My 30M younger brother Louis, 27M, has been ruining my life for years, and my parents refuse to see it. Now he's targeting my girlfriend Andrea, 26F, and I don't know what to do anymore. We live in a small town in Ohio where everyone knows everyone. My parents run a successful accounting firm and care a lot about their reputation. They had me first, then Louis 3 years later. From day one, Louis could do no wrong in their eyes. When Louis was 7 and I was 10, I saved up my allowance for months to buy a remote control helicopter. Louis wanted to play with it, but I said no because he had already broken 2 of my toys that week. While I was at school the next day, he took it outside and flew it straight into our neighbor's fence, breaking it completely. When I got home and found the pieces, Louis told our parents I had been flying it recklessly and it was an accident. My parents made me apologize to Louis for not sharing and bought him his own helicopter the next weekend. When I was 15, I had been dating my first girlfriend Phoebe for about 6 months. Louis, who was 12 at the time, started telling people at school that I had cheated on her with multiple girls. He made up detailed stories about seeing me with other girls behind the movie theater and at parties I had never even attended. Phoebe broke up with me without even asking for my side of the story. When I confronted Louis, he just shrugged and said maybe I shouldn't be so boring if I wanted to keep a girlfriend. My parents said boys will be boys and that I was overreacting. The pattern continued through high school and college. Every serious relationship I had, Louis would find a way to destroy. He told my girlfriend Amy that I had a gambling problem and showed her fake bank statements. He convinced my girlfriend Rachel that I was planning to break up with her anyway, so she should save herself the embarrassment. Each time, my parents either didn't believe me or said Louis was just looking out for me. After college, I moved back home to help with the family business while saving money. Louis also lived at home and worked part-time at a sporting goods store. He had never held a job for more than a few months. My parents paid for his car, his phone, his clothes, everything. They said he was still finding himself. 2 years ago, I met Andrea at a coffee shop downtown. She was visiting from the next town over for a job interview at the local elementary school. She's a second-grade teacher and the kindest person I've ever met. We started dating, and for the first time in my life, I kept a relationship completely secret from my family. For 8 months, I told them nothing about Andrea. We would meet in the next town over or drive to the city for dates. I had learned my lesson about introducing women to my family. But Andrea started asking questions about why she had never met my parents or been to my house. She thought I was embarrassed of her or that maybe I was married. I had to make a choice. I decided to tell my parents about Andrea first, without Louis around. I went to their house on a Thursday evening when Louis was supposedly at work. I explained that I had been seeing someone for 8 months and wanted to bring her for dinner on Sunday. My mother immediately started planning the menu and asking questions about Andrea's job and family. My father nodded approvingly when I mentioned she was a teacher. Everything seemed normal. Sunday came and I picked up Andrea from her apartment. She had bought a new dress and spent an hour doing her hair. She was excited to finally meet my family. I had told her some stories about Louis but made them sound like typical sibling rivalry. I didn't want to scare her away. We arrived at my parents' house at exactly 6 o'clock. My mother answered the door with a huge smile and hugged Andrea warmly. My father shook her hand and complimented her dress. Louis appeared from the kitchen and immediately pushed past our mother to get to Andrea. He wrapped her in a hug that lasted at least 10 seconds longer than appropriate. Andrea's smile faltered slightly, but she politely hugged him back. During dinner, Louis dominated the conversation. He sat directly across from Andrea and kept leaning forward to touch her arm while talking. He told story after story about my childhood, but twisted each one to make me look bad. He described the time I got sick at a school carnival as me being too weak to handle normal activities. He turned the story of me getting lost at a mall into evidence that I had always been irresponsible and needed constant supervision. My parents laughed at every story and added their own comments about how Louis had always been the more reliable brother. Andrea kept glancing at me with confusion. She had heard completely different versions of these same stories from me. The worst moment came when my mother served dessert. Louis insisted on cutting Andrea's slice of cake for her and tried to feed her the first bite from his own fork. Andrea politely declined and said she could manage, but Louis persisted. He actually grabbed her chin with his free hand and tried to guide the fork to her mouth. Andrea jerked away and said stop, please. Louis laughed and said he was just being friendly. After dinner, Andrea excused herself to use the bathroom. I followed her to the hallway and found Louis standing outside the bathroom door. When Andrea came out, he immediately stepped closer to her, effectively trapping her between himself and the wall. Louis was telling her that she seemed too smart and ambitious for someone like me. He said I had always been the type to hold people back and that she should consider dating someone with more drive. Someone like him. Andrea tried to step around him, but he moved to block her path. She said excuse me twice, but he kept talking. I stepped between them and told Louis to back off. He raised his hands in mock surrender and said he was just getting to know my girlfriend. My parents appeared from the kitchen and asked what was happening. Louis said I was being paranoid and possessive. My father told me to relax and stop being so territorial. We left shortly after that. Andrea was quiet during the drive back to her apartment. She finally said that dinner had been uncomfortable and that Louis had made her feel uneasy. She asked if he always acted that way around women. I told her the truth about his history of sabotaging my relationships. Andrea listened to everything without interrupting. When I finished, she said she understood why I had waited so long to introduce her. She also said she wasn't going to let Louis or anyone else ruin what we had together. We agreed that we would limit contact with my family and see them only when necessary. For 2 weeks, everything seemed fine. Then Andrea started getting phone calls at work. The caller would hang up as soon as she answered. Her principal mentioned that someone had been calling the school asking questions about her personal life and work schedule. A parent complained that a man had been sitting in the parking lot during pickup time, just watching the building. Andrea started staying late at school to avoid walking to her car alone. One evening, She called me in tears because someone had followed her home and sat outside her apartment building for 20 minutes before driving away. She had taken down the license plate number. When I ran it through a friend who works at the DMV, it came back registered to one of Louie's friends from high school. I drove straight to my parents' house and found Louie in the garage working on his car. I confronted him about the harassment. He denied everything at first, then smirked and said maybe Andrea was just paranoid. He said some women couldn't handle attention from real men. I grabbed him by the shirt and told him to stay away from Andrea. He shoved me back and said Andrea was fair game since I obviously couldn't take care of her properly. That's when I hit him. I punched him square in the jaw and he fell backward into his toolbox. My parents came running from the house. Louie was holding his face and yelling that I had attacked him for no reason. I tried to explain about the stalking and harassment, but they wouldn't listen. My mother said I had clearly lost my mind and needed anger management. My father told me to get out of his house and not come back until I apologized to Louie. I left and haven't spoken to any of them since. That was 6 months ago. Andrea and I moved in together and tried to move on with our lives. But the harassment didn't stop. If anything, it got worse.
Hey guys, just in case TikTok gets banned in the US next month, make sure you're following the YouTube channel link in bio.
I thought things couldn't get worse after my last post, but I was wrong. The harassment escalated beyond anything I could have imagined, and my family's response has been even more twisted than I expected. After I went no contact with my parents and Louie, the phone calls to Andrea's work increased. Her principal was getting daily calls from someone claiming to be her ex-boyfriend, saying she had mental health issues and shouldn't be around children. The caller knew specific details about her lesson plans and which grade she taught. Someone was clearly watching her very closely. Andrea's car was vandalized twice in the school parking lot. First, someone poured paint thinner on her windshield, cracking it completely. The second time, all 4 tires were slashed. The school installed additional security cameras, but whoever was doing this knew exactly where the blind spots were. The breaking point came 6 weeks ago. Andrea was working late, grading papers in her classroom around 8 p.m. The custodian had already left, and she thought she was alone in the building. She heard footsteps in the hallway and assumed it was the night security guard making his rounds. When she looked up from her desk, Louie was standing in her classroom doorway. He had somehow gotten past the locked main entrance and walked through the entire school to find her room. Andrea immediately grabbed her phone and threatened to call the police. Louie stepped into the room and closed the door behind him. He said they needed to talk without my interference. He told Andrea that I had been lying about him and that he had never meant to make her uncomfortable. He said he understood why she might have gotten the wrong impression, but he was actually trying to protect her from my controlling behavior. Andrea stood up and told him to leave immediately. Louie moved closer to her desk and said he wasn't finished talking. He said I had a history of psychological manipulation and that my previous girlfriends had all left me for the same reason. He claimed I was isolating Andrea from her friends and family and that soon she would have no one left but me. Andrea tried to walk around her desk toward the door, but Louie grabbed her wrist. He said she needed to listen because he was the only one brave enough to tell her the truth. Andrea yanked her arm away and ran for the door. Louie followed her into the hallway, calling after her that she would regret not listening to him. Andrea made it to the main office and triggered the silent alarm. The police arrived within minutes and found Louie still in the building, looking through windows of other classrooms. He told the officers he was there to pick up his nephew and had gotten lost looking for the main office. When they asked for his nephew's name and teacher, he couldn't provide either. The officers arrested Louie for trespassing and took Andrea's statement. She showed them photos of her vandalized car and played recordings of some of the threatening voicemails she had been receiving. The detective assigned to the case said they had enough evidence to charge Louie with stalking and harassment in addition to the trespassing. Here's where it gets really twisted. My parents hired a lawyer for Louie before he even had his arraignment. The lawyer contacted Andrea's principal and claimed that Andrea had been having an affair with Louie and that her accusations were revenge for him ending the relationship. The lawyer provided fake text messages that appeared to be from Andrea, begging Louie to leave his girlfriend and be with her. Andrea's principal called her into the office and asked about the allegations. Andrea showed him the police reports and explained the entire situation. The principal believed her, but said the school board was concerned about the negative publicity. They suggested Andrea take a leave of absence until the criminal case was resolved. Andrea refused to leave her job because of false accusations. She hired her own lawyer, who immediately identified the fake text messages as fabricated evidence. The metadata showed they had been created on a computer, not sent from an actual phone. Andrea's lawyer filed complaints with the state bar against Louie's attorney for presenting fraudulent evidence. The most disgusting part came last week. My mother called Andrea directly and tried to convince her to drop the charges. She said Louie was just a confused young man who had developed feelings for her and didn't know how to express them appropriately. She offered to pay for Andrea's car repairs and promised that Louie would stay away from her if she would just give him another chance. When Andrea refused, my mother's tone completely changed. She said Andrea was destroying their family over a misunderstanding and that no jury would believe her word against Louie's. She said Louie had friends who would testify that Andrea had been flirting with him at family dinner and leading him on. She warned Andrea that small towns have long memories and that she might find it difficult to continue working here if she pursued the charges. Andrea recorded the entire conversation and gave it to the prosecutor. Witness intimidation is a felony in our state, so now my mother is also facing criminal charges. Louie's trial is scheduled for next month. His lawyer is trying to get a plea deal, but the prosecutor says the evidence is too strong and the behavior too serious for anything less than jail time. The school board voted unanimously to support Andrea and provide her with additional security measures. Andrea and I have been looking at jobs in other states. We both realize that staying here means dealing with my family's harassment for years to come. Louie might go to jail, but my parents have made it clear they will never stop blaming Andrea for their son's actions. I keep thinking about all the warning signs I ignored over the years. Every relationship Louie destroyed, every lie my parents believed, every time they chose his version of events over obvious evidence. I thought they were just enabling bad behavior, but now I see they were actively participating in it. Louis's trial ended last week, and the aftermath has been more dramatic than I expected. The verdict was guilty on all charges, but what happened during the trial revealed just how deep my family's dysfunction really goes. The prosecution presented a mountain of evidence against Louis. Security footage from the school showing him entering through a side door he had propped open earlier in the day. Phone records proving he had made over 60 calls to Andrea's workplace. Text messages between Louis and his friends coordinating the harassment campaign. The fake evidence his lawyer had submitted was also presented as an example of ongoing witness intimidation. Andrea testified for 3 hours about the stalking and harassment. She remained calm and factual throughout her testimony, even when Louis's lawyer tried to imply she had somehow encouraged his behavior. The judge stopped the cross-examination twice when the questions became inappropriate. Louis took the stand in his own defense, which his lawyer had advised against. He immediately started ranting about how I had stolen Andrea from him and how she had been sending him mixed signals. He claimed Andrea had smiled at him during the family dinner, which he interpreted as romantic interest. He said following her and calling her workplace were just his way of trying to get to know her better. The prosecutor asked Louis to explain how breaking into an elementary school at night was part of getting to know someone. Louis said he thought Andrea would be impressed by his persistence and would finally agree to talk to him without my interference. When asked why he had vandalized her car, Louis said he was trying to give her a reason to call him for help. The most damaging moment came when the prosecutor played the recording of my mother threatening Andrea. Louis interrupted the playback and yelled that his mother was right and that Andrea was destroying their family. He said Andrea should have been grateful for his attention because most women would be lucky to have someone fight for them the way he had fought for her. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. Louis was found guilty of stalking, harassment, criminal trespass, and vandalism. The judge sentenced him to 18 months in jail followed by 2 years of probation. He was also ordered to have no contact with Andrea or me for 5 years. Louis's reaction to the verdict was explosive. He started screaming at Andrea that she would regret destroying his life. He threatened to make sure everyone in town knew what kind of person she really was. The bailiffs had to physically restrain him while he was dragged from the courtroom. My parents sat in the front row during the entire trial, glaring at Andrea and whispering to each other. After the verdict, my father stood up and shouted that this was a travesty of justice. He said Louis was the real victim and that Andrea had manipulated the entire situation to make herself look innocent. My mother's trial for witness intimidation was scheduled for the following week. She ended up taking a plea deal that included 6 months of house arrest and community service. Her lawyer negotiated to keep her out of jail because she had no prior criminal record, but she now has a permanent criminal conviction on her record. The local newspaper covered both trials extensively. My parents' accounting firm has lost several major clients who don't want to be associated with a family involved in stalking and witness intimidation. My father had to sell his partnership in the firm and take a job with a larger company in the next county. The most shocking revelation came after Louis' sentencing. His cellmate from his brief pretrial detention reached out to the prosecutor with additional information. Louis had apparently bragged about sabotaging my previous relationships and had detailed plans for escalating his harassment of Andrea if he was released. Louis had told his cellmate that he planned to follow Andrea to whatever new job she found and repeat the same pattern of harassment. He said he knew he could eventually wear her down and convince her that I was the problem. He also said he had friends willing to help him continue the campaign even if he went to jail. This information was used to justify the maximum sentence and the extended no-contact order. The prosecutor said Louis' own words proved he had no intention of stopping his behavior and represented a continued threat to both Andrea and me. Andrea and I received job offers in Colorado the day after Louis' sentencing. We accepted immediately and gave notice at our current jobs. Andrea's principal and the school board wrote letters of recommendation praising her professionalism throughout the entire ordeal. Several teachers and parents also wrote letters supporting her character and dedication. We've started packing and will be gone before Louis is released from jail. Andrea says she's not running away from the problem, but rather running toward a new life where Louis' actions can't define her anymore. I agree with her completely. My extended family has been split by the trials. Some relatives believe Louis got what he deserved and have apologized for my parents' behavior. Others think Andrea overreacted and that we should have handled things privately within the family. I've decided not to maintain relationships with anyone who thinks stalking and harassment are acceptable family behaviors. We've been living in Colorado for 4 months now, and life has been completely different from what we left behind in Ohio. Andrea found a position at an excellent elementary school, and I'm working for a marketing firm in Denver. For the first time in years, we wake up without worrying about harassment or family drama. Louis was released from jail 2 weeks ago after serving his full sentence. His probation officer contacted us to confirm our address and remind us about the no-contact order. Within 3 days of his release, he violated that order. Louis somehow obtained our new phone number and called Andrea's school, claiming to be her brother and saying there was a family emergency. The school secretary was suspicious because Andrea had specifically warned them about potential harassment from Ohio. They called Andrea to verify, and she immediately contacted the local police and Louis' probation officer. Because Louis crossed state lines to violate the no-contact order, federal charges were filed. He was arrested again within a week and is now facing additional jail time. His probation was revoked, and he's looking at another 18 months in prison. My parents apparently drove to Colorado to try to find us after Louis' arrest. They went to Andrea's school and demanded to speak with her, claiming they wanted to apologize and work things out. The school principal called the police, who escorted my parents off the property and warned them about trespassing. That evening, my parents showed up at our apartment building. They somehow got past the security door and were knocking on our door when we came home from work. My father immediately started yelling about how we had destroyed their family and ruined Louis' life. My mother was crying and begging Andrea to drop the new charges against Louis. I told them to leave immediately or I would call the police. My father said they had driven 12 hours to talk to us and deserved to be heard. Andrea calmly pulled out her phone and started dialing. My mother grabbed Andrea's arm and said she just needed 5 minutes to explain everything. That was their second mistake. Putting hands on Andrea after everything that had happened was unforgivable. I stepped between them and told my parents they had exactly 30 seconds to get out of our building before the police arrived. My father started threatening to sue us for destroying his business and his family's reputation. He said he would make sure everyone in our new community knew what kind of people we really were. My mother said they had spent their life savings on lawyers and legal fees because of us. The police arrived and arrested both of my parents for harassment and trespassing. Because they had traveled across state lines to harass us, federal prosecutors are considering additional charges. The local district attorney said my parents' behavior showed a pattern of escalation that warranted serious consequences. Andrea and I testified via video link for Louis' federal sentencing hearing last month. The judge sentenced him to 2 years in federal prison followed by 3 years of supervised probation. He will not be eligible for early release, and any future violations will result in even longer sentences. My parents were released on bail but are prohibited from leaving Ohio while their case is pending. Their lawyer is trying to negotiate a plea deal, but the prosecutor wants jail time because of their history of witness intimidation and their escalation to physical contact with Andrea. The most satisfying part of this whole ordeal has been watching my parents face consequences for their actions. For 30 years, they enabled Louis' behavior and made excuses for his increasingly serious misconduct. They never believed his victims and always found ways to blame everyone else for his actions. Now they're facing criminal charges, financial ruin, and the loss of their community standing. Their business is gone, their reputation is destroyed, and their golden child is in federal prison. The reality they created through decades of denial and enabling has finally collapsed on them. Andrea and I got married last month in a small ceremony with just a few close friends. We didn't invite any family members and didn't announce it publicly. We wanted our wedding to be about our future together, not about the toxic relationships we left behind. Several people have asked if I ever feel guilty about what happened to my parents and Louis. The answer is no. Every choice they made, every lie they told, every victim they blamed led directly to this outcome. They had countless opportunities to address Louis' behavior and chose not to. They created this situation through years of willful blindness and enabling. Andrea is pregnant with our first child, due in the spring. We've decided to raise our children with no contact with my parents or Louis. Our kids will grow up knowing they're safe and protected, something I never experienced in my own childhood. We've built a life based on honesty, accountability, and mutual respect. We don't tolerate harassment, manipulation, or abuse from anyone, including family members. Breaking the cycle of dysfunction was the best decision we ever made. People sometimes ask if I miss my family or regret cutting them off completely. I don't miss the constant drama, the gaslighting, or the fear of what Louis might do next. I don't regret protecting Andrea and our future children from people who refuse to acknowledge their own destructive behavior. My real family is Andrea and our unborn child. We're building something healthy and stable together, far away from the toxicity that defined my first 30 years. That's enough family for me.